So this is the Coastal Marsh motif. So I've already mixed some colors out. This is the woodland set that I sell, or you can make your own colors at home. I have kind of a nice sort of huntery green mixed up here with some deep moss and maybe some cavern or bear in it. And this green I'm going to use along here for this tree line. It's in the background. It's not very descriptive. And now I'll just come in here and sort of dance my brush along this line and around some of these pre-drawn lines. You can just go over them, use them as a guide. And here I've gone outside of my area, so I'll just blot that back. And I'm starting with this tree line just so I can get a basis of the depth of green here, so that when I do my marsh and my grasses, I can make them something distinct. Go along this edge here. And because those are two different colors of green, I'll come back in and blot, sort of deposit some green of that shade into that tree line. And this is a little solid for me, so I'll pull some of this pigment back, move it over here. Now I'm going to mix up a little bit more of that and make it a little darker. Of course, in the south here, you'd have a little bit of pine and those oaks with the Spanish moss that might be in the distance. So I've got those tones here for ours. And I'll just kind of draw a little line here along. You can start there if you want, along that horizon line. And then now I want to come in here and do this kind of a marshy area, and it's going to be a mix of it's a pretty bright green, but I'm just going to put that in the background. I'm okay with that being a little wet and getting into that area. I can make that horizon strong and distinct again in a little bit if I'd like. Okay, and then I'll come in here, especially along those little lines that are drawn in, and sort of deposit on a horizontal line. You'll see it's kind of blending because it is wet now. So as I'm adding the next layer, it's kind of a wet on wet. Now I'll take kind of a sandy color and dapple that in just a bit. Some of those grasses get a little dried out, and it'll have that kind of brown and green mix, and actually have a little bit of blue in there as well. So if you want to get some blue green coming in here a little bit, that, and especially in these grasses, we'll make sure to get that blue green. So now we will kind of get this sort of silvery water color in here. And of course you'd want to make sure that this green is dry, or make sure to go around it very carefully. And although I have to deposit some of this paint in a vertical motion, I really want to make sure it looks horizontal. So before it dries, I'll kind of move it left to right just to make sure that it looks like the way that water would flow. And I don't have to have every little area filled in. We can always go back later. It's kind of hard to tell what is a grass and what is the water. Just kind of getting that base layer in here. And I don't want too much of a white area around each frond because it'll start to look odd. And you can always go back now that it's still a little wet, and kind of get around some of those lines that were left there. Doesn't have to be too meticulous. When we go back over our green, you don't even have to stay in the lines anyway. This area really won't be seen in the frame, but getting down there at the bottom. Use this mist color in this box, and I'm going to, these little fine cloud lines, just kind of follow that line a little bit darker along the bottom. So that would look terrible if we left it like that. So we're letting that kind of settle in for a sec. And now I'm going to pull away from that dark line. And really don't want to end up with a deposit around it too much. So kind of spreading that. And now this is starting to dry here, so we want to go ahead and get that. Right now it still looks a little bit unnatural, but we'll just work on, just trust the process. And you can always, like this line right here doesn't really have a top to its cloud, so we can come in and make one. I just added that in for balance because you definitely want to have more than two clouds in here. And they're kind of interesting looking clouds anyway, but that's the photo that I was using as a reference. Looked like that. Clouds are so fascinating. Honestly, when you go to paint them, you think, is that actually real? But if you'll pay attention to clouds, they really look unreal. Okay, so we'll kind of let that, now that we've moved that around enough, let that dry, and we'll come back and add in some definition later. As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to kind of pull a little bit of pigment off the top of that, just so that the bottom is heavier in pigment. And I did it while it was still wet so that it wasn't hard to remove when I come back. I like this color here, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and start. And as long as your water is dry, you can come in here. Actually, let's take a little bit of yellow and put that underneath. Just a few of these. That way we'll get a variety of greens. And we imagine when the sun hits those, you can see the yellow within that frond, as you would in nature. These little seagrasses that are in the intercoastal. I mentioned in one of my other videos that we like to go to Hilton Head, South Carolina. They have beautiful intercoastal waterways, and I like to kayak or paddleboard. in these areas. So pretty. And of course, you get to see dolphins. So peaceful. Now, these lines are very sketchy, so you do not have to follow them exactly as they are. That's why I did it very messy, so you have your own creative license to add more or go outside the lines. It shouldn't matter. You just want to get enough of a sharp look at the top every so often. So you'd use the top of your brush just to make sure to get those points nice. And I always suggest people practice doing lines, really thin lines or fatter lines with a consistent pressure of your hand, so you feel confident you're not going to put a gigantic fat line there you don't like. And you can always add a little bit of water that's clear, scrub it, dab on your paper towel, and kind of erase any mistakes you may have made. And I think I want to add a little bit more yellow, and I can do that afterward. I like how that looks. Don't want to do it to every single one. But okay, I'm going to do the same thing up here. I was a little heavy-handed with that earlier, so I want to make sure that that dried before I started putting these little grasses in. You can always add more than where I have those lines. And now I made this kind of reddish brown to show where the tide goes down, and you start to see those muddy areas where all that wildlife lives. And that'll kind of go down into that brown, which I think will actually look very nice. I'm not going up here because I want to make it look like we're looking in this direction a little bit more. Oh, it's too yellow. That's a little wet, so it's giving a nice little blur effect there. And I'll go in back into here. I was a little heavy-handed on those, so I'll go back and add a little water. Sometimes these little deposits just help bring contrast. Every single one of these, I've done many, turn out a little bit different. I've taught a few classes. Everyone's style's a little different, so don't feel like you have to follow mine exactly. Now, in some of this greenery up here, I'm going to just tap in a little darker green along these areas to make it look like there's foliage back here. I've got this nice crisp line along there, which is great. I like that. little bit of blue along that, just to kind of contrast, sort of add that more swishy look. Now that if the fronds are pretty dry, try not to touch them too much. And you can also dapple like this to kind of get a little bit more of a vertical look, as though there's grasses in there. So that's just totally a personal preference and choice. And I'm kind of liking how my sky is turning out. So you can just decide how much blue you want to be across this area or not. And just going to add a little bit more in here to get some texture and kind of distract from the specifics of those clouds. I drew them in, like I said, just so that there was balance. Give you a guideline. You can keep playing with the different layers, adding more in to get more definition, but this is the basic of that design, and I hope that you enjoy creating.